You know California for its coastline, its glittering cities, and its Hollywood dreams. But there's another California underneath the golden one, out in the deserts, up in the mountain passes, down in the valleys nobody drives through anymore, where whole towns were built on the promise of a fortune and then left to sink back into the dust. Here are 12 California ghost towns that Google Maps won't show you, and number 1 sits at the center of an environmental disaster so complete that some people believe it was allowed to happen on purpose. So hit subscribe and let's begin. Number 12, Llano del Rio in Los Angeles County. Out on the sun-scorched flats of the Antelope Valley, about 70 miles north of Los Angeles, lie the ruins of a perfect society that never quite worked. All you'll find today is a scatter of crumbling foundations and a few walls holding against the desert wind, but a little over a century ago, this was meant to be paradise. Llano del Rio was founded in 1914 by a socialist lawyer named Job Harriman, who, after losing the Los Angeles mayoral race, threw everything into building a cooperative colony where the workers shared it all equally: the land, the labor, the profit. Within 2 years, more than 1,000 people called Llano home. But the desert had other ideas. Disputes over water rights crippled the colony. The wells couldn't keep up with the growing population, and fights over leadership pulled it apart from the inside. By 1918, 4 years in, Llano del Rio was finished, and the colonists moved to Louisiana to try again. Walk out through the brush, and you'll find the old stone assembly hall, its arched doorways still framing nothing but open sky, and rusted pipes poking from the sand where the gardens grew. It is one of the only socialist utopian colonies in American history that left physical ruins behind. Number 11, Panamint City in Inyo County. High in the Panamint Mountains, jammed into a narrow canyon above Death Valley, sit the bones of one of the wildest silver towns the state ever produced. But in 1873, 3 fugitives hiding from the law stumbled onto one of the richest silver strikes in California, and everything changed overnight. Within months, Panamint City exploded into being. More than 2,000 people crammed into Surprise Canyon, throwing up homes and saloons on the steep walls, the main street so narrow, pack mules could barely squeeze through. The place got so lawless that Wells Fargo refused to operate there, and to stop the constant robberies, the mine owners cast their silver into 400-pound cannonballs, too heavy for any bandit to carry off. Then in 1876, a flash flood tore down Surprise Canyon and wiped out most of the town in a single night. The veins were already thinning, and by 1877, the place stood empty. Hikers who make the hard climb find a haunting landscape: stone foundations gripping the hillsides, a massive brick smokestack from the old smelter still upright, mine tunnels running back into the mountain, and a silence broken only by the wind. Number 10, Drawbridge in Alameda County. It's sitting out in the middle of San Francisco Bay, ringed by marsh and open water, and you cannot legally reach it. It began in the 1870s as a hunting retreat for wealthy San Franciscans shooting ducks in the wetlands, with a railroad stop built on a thin strip of land between 2 tidal sloughs. Over time, workers and fishermen settled in, and by the early 1900s, Drawbridge had hotels, hunting lodges, and a small year-round population, weekend visitors riding the train out to escape the city. Then came the slide. The wetlands were diked and drained for salt production, the ducks collapsed, the bay grew polluted, and the railroad cut back service. The buildings emptied one by one, and the last resident left in 1979. What makes Drawbridge so strange is that it still stands, and yet no one can get to it. Aerial photos show the houses collapsing in slow motion, tilting into the mud. The railroad still runs right past the town, and if you ride Amtrak between San Jose and Oakland, you can glimpse the buildings from the window, though almost no passenger knows what they're looking at. Number 9, Cerro Gordo in Inyo County. Perched at 8,500 feet in the Inyo Mountains, looking out over the vast emptiness of the Owens Valley, Cerro Gordo was once the richest silver mine in California. And the ore pulled out of these mountains built Los Angeles, which is not an exaggeration. At its peak, the town held over 1,000 residents and dozens of buildings stacked up the steep slope. But the silver ran out eventually, and by the 1880s, most of the miners had moved on. Cerro Gordo cycled through zinc mining and a string of failed revivals, and for decades it sat empty, watched over by caretakers who kept the buildings from caving in. Here, the story takes an unusual turn. In 2018, a group of investors bought Cerro Gordo outright to restore it, and they have been documenting it online ever since, turning up artifacts, rebuilding, and surviving a fire that destroyed the historic hotel. The town lives in a strange in-between now, and visitors can stay the night in the original miners' cabins and walk streets that have not changed in 100 years. Number 8. Ballarat in Inyo County. At the western edge of Death Valley, where the Panamint Mountains drop to the desert floor, a handful of buildings bake under a merciless sun. It was founded in 1897 to supply the miners working the canyons above, and at its height it held several hundred people, with a school, a post office, saloons, and a Wells Fargo office, the gateway to Panamint City, and the camps up in the mountains. But the mines above started to fail. The camps emptied one by one, and with no miners to supply, Ballarat lost its reason to exist. By the 1920s, nearly everyone was gone. What sets Ballarat apart is that someone has almost always stayed. Caretakers have occupied the town on and off for decades, keeping up the last buildings and greeting the occasional traveler, and a small general store hung on until fairly recently. The current resident looks after the old jail, the adobe ruins, and the cemetery where prospectors lie beneath hand-carved markers. Ballarat carries a darker thread too, having served as a hideout for criminals and outcasts across the 20th century, and that reputation still hangs over the place like heat shimmer. Number 7. Bodie in Inyo County. No list of California ghost towns is complete without Bodie, but most people don't realize how well preserved it actually is, or how strange it feels to walk a town frozen mid-step. Bodie sits above 8,000 feet in the eastern Sierra, surrounded by sagebrush and vicious winters. At its peak, Bodie had close to 10,000 residents, 65 saloons, and a name as one of the most violent towns in the West, killing so routine that the phrase, "bad man from Bodie," worked its way into the local vocabulary. What makes Bodie remarkable is what came next, which was nothing. The state made it a historic park and preserved it in a condition it calls arrested decay. The buildings haven't been restored, only kept from falling down. Walk through Bodie today and you'll find dishes still on the tables, goods still on the store shelves, coffins in the mortuary, pool balls racked and waiting, as though everyone simply walked off one afternoon and never came back. Rangers patrol the streets to stop theft, but the real deterrent is a legend, that anyone who takes so much as a nail from Bodie is cursed with terrible luck. Every year, the park receives packages from people mailing stolen items back, along with letters describing the misfortunes that followed them home. Number 6. Calico in San Bernardino County. The original was founded in 1881 after a huge silver strike in the surrounding hills, and within 5 years, it had over 500 mines, 1,200 people, and all the wildness a desert boomtown could hold. The hills themselves, streaked in bands of red and orange and brown, gave the town its name. But when silver prices crashed in the 1890s, Calico collapsed almost overnight. The mines closed, the people scattered, and the buildings rotted under the desert sun for decades. Today, Calico runs as a county regional park, gift shops, train rides, staged gunfights and all. But here's what most visitors miss. Behind the tourist front, the original mines still honeycomb the hills. And if you take the hiking trails around Calico, you'll come across tunnels, abandoned equipment, and foundations that have nothing to do with the reconstructed main street. The real ghost town is hiding in plain sight, buried under its own commercialized version. Number 5. Darwin, in Inyo County. At the end of a lonely road in the desert between Death Valley and the Sierra Nevada sits Darwin, a town that technically still has residents but feels completely abandoned. Darwin was founded in 1874 when silver turned up in the nearby Argus Range. It boomed briefly, hitting over 1,000 people, then crashed when the ore ran thin, and spent the next century cycling through activity and abandonment. Lead and zinc mining kept a few families employed through the world wars. By the 1970s, Darwin had become something else, as artists, hermits, and people walking away from conventional life drifted in and took over the abandoned buildings, forming a strange little community of outsiders living among the ruins. Visitors are tolerated but not welcomed, signs warn against trespassing, and some buildings are occupied while others are collapsing, and it isn't always obvious which is which. Walking through Darwin feels like intruding on a secret society that has chosen to live in the past. Number 4. Skidoo, in Inyo County. High in the Panamint Mountains above Death Valley, the remains of Skidoo lie scattered across a windswept slope. Skidoo was born in 1906 when gold was discovered at nearly 6,000 feet, 23 miles from the nearest water. That distance should have killed it before it started, but the miners solved the problem by building a 23-mile pipeline from Telescope Peak, one of the longest in Death Valley's history. But the most famous thing that ever happened here was a hanging. In 1908, a man killed a popular saloon keeper in a drunken quarrel, and the town didn't bother waiting for a trial. A mob dragged him from jail and hanged him from a telephone pole. As the legend goes, the body was cut down and hanged a second time the next day, so a late-arriving newspaper reporter could photograph it, and by some accounts, a third time for yet another photographer. Whether all of that is true is still argued over, but it cemented Skidoo's reputation for rough justice. The gold gave out by 1917, and the town emptied fast. Today, foundations and scattered debris mark where the building stood. The pipeline is long gone, and a few mine shafts run back into the mountainside. Number 3. Randsburg, in Kern County. Randsburg is a ghost town that refuses to admit it's dead. This tiny mining community in the western Mojave still has around 70 residents, a working post office, and even a bar that pours drinks on weekends. But walk the main street and you'll count more abandoned buildings than occupied ones. Gold was found here in 1895, and Randsburg, with the neighboring towns of Johannesburg and Red Mountain, formed a mining district that produced millions in gold, silver, and tungsten over the following decades. Unlike most ghost towns, Randsburg never fully emptied. A small population clung on through every bust, waiting for the next boom, which sometimes came and sometimes didn't. The general store has run continuously since 1896. The saloon still serves drinks in a building that hasn't fundamentally changed in over a century. The streets are unpaved, and the buildings are the originals, nothing rebuilt or sanitized for tourists. Walking through Randsburg is like seeing what Bodie might be if people still lived in it. Number 2. Masonic, in Mono County. Hidden in the mountains above Bridgeport, reached by a rough dirt road that turns impassable in winter, the remains of Masonic cling to a steep hillside surrounded by forest. Masonic was founded around 1902 when gold was discovered in these remote hills, and it grew fast, perched on terrain so steep that some buildings had to be built on stilts just to sit level. At its peak, several hundred miners and their families lived here, riding out brutal winters above 8,000 feet. The mines produced steady gold for a few years, and a small business district grew up, but the deposits weren't deep. By 1911, the mines were struggling. A fire in 1909 had already taken part of the town, and when the stamps fell silent, Masonic emptied within months. Today, it's considered one of the best preserved ghost towns in California. Several cabins still stand, their logs weathered to silver gray. The remains of the stamp mill rust quietly in a meadow, and mining equipment lies scattered across the hillside in a place that feels genuinely forgotten. Number 1. Bombay Beach, in Imperial County. On the eastern shore of the Salton Sea sits Bombay Beach, a place so apocalyptic it barely reads as California at all. The Salton Sea itself was an accident. In 1905, irrigation canals broke open and flooded a desert basin for 2 straight years, creating the largest lake in California in the middle of nowhere, and for decades it was sold as a resort paradise, Bombay Beach lined with vacation homes and yacht clubs. Then it all came apart. The sea had no outlet, the salinity spiked, fish died by the millions, the stench chased the tourists off, and rising water swallowed whole neighborhoods. Fewer than 300 people remain today, living among the ruins, abandoned trailers rotting in the sun, the beach itself covered not in sand, but in the crushed bones of dead fish. And here's where it turns strange. Scientists warned for decades that the Salton Sea was dying. Restoration plans were drawn up, budgets proposed, promises made, and none of it happened. The sea keeps shrinking, exposing toxic lakebed dust that now blows into nearby communities and drives respiratory illness in children. Some locals believe the state deliberately let the sea die, sacrificing it to send water to wealthier coastal cities, while others point to agricultural interests that needed the basin as a dumping ground for runoff. And the truth stays buried under decades of water politics that few people fully understand. And yet, something unexpected has grown out of the collapse. Artists have found Bombay Beach. Sculptures rise off the salt flats, murals cover the abandoned buildings, and an annual festival draws visitors to this apocalyptic shore. Walking through Bombay Beach feels like watching the end of the world and the start of something new at the same time. A ghost town that isn't quite dead, an environmental crime scene that turned into an art colony. That's 12 California ghost towns the map would rather you never found. From a socialist dream in the Antelope Valley to a poisoned sea, the state still hasn't explained. Every one of them was somebody's fortune once. If you know a ghost town that belongs on the next list, drop it in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss where we go next.